Welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to view this pre-recorded presentation. The presentation we're going to be giving here is the first part of a two-part presentation that will be provided to the Mercer Island School Board. The second portion of this presentation will be delivered live on August 24th to the school board. And I will be explaining in a few minutes what is contained within this first presentation and also what we'll be talking about on August 24th. My name is Leroy Landers. I am a principal with Malum Architects. Malum has had the wonderful opportunity to work with the school district and the Mercer Island community on a number of different projects for more than a decade now. In 2020, we had an opportunity to work with the district and a facility planning committee, which was comprised of students, parents, and other community members to develop a long-range facility plan for the district. The primary objective of the long-range facility plan is to serve as a roadmap for the management of school district facilities over time, such that they continue to support learning in the Mercer Island School District, and also the continued success of your students. And so with that, let's talk a little bit about what we'll be presenting this evening. In this first portion of the presentation, we're going to touch very briefly on the schedule and what we've covered, where we've been with the Facility Planning Committee. We're going to do a high-level overview of some of the needs that were identified relative to your existing facilities. Touch on confirmation of some of the 2020 work that was completed by the Facility Planning Committee. Look at a few additional considerations that have come into play since 2020. So these are now being considered by a Facility Planning Committee that was established in 2023 to provide an update for this long-range facility plan, and then also touch on the basis of costs. As I mentioned, we have come back now and are currently underway working with a new Facility Planning Committee. Some of the members of this committee also participated in the previous effort in 2020 to create an update of this long-range facility plan. And the content of this presentation is really going to cover the first meeting that was undertaken with the Facility Planning Committee in April of this year. And the second meeting that we will be having with the school district, again on August 24th, live, will cover the plan approaches that have been developed over the course of a number of meetings with the Facility Planning Committee. These meetings occurred in the months of April, May, and June of this year. And I do want to stress that when we get to that point on the August 24th meeting, and we're looking at plan approaches, these plan approaches were really developed through the work of the Facility Planning Committee. They were not developed by the Mercer Island School District. They weren't developed by Malum as a consultant. We were really serving to facilitate the process of long-range planning, and all the kind of critical thinking, the discussion, and the creation of these long-range plan approaches was done by your community, the Facility Planning Committee. The other point I do want to make sure I touch on is that these long-range approaches, when they are presented to the board on August 24th, are not intended to be complete in any way. They are not a finished product. The intention of them is to really serve as a basis for further discussion, and pending consideration by the board and pending a decision to take these initial plan approaches out to the broader community, what we hope to do is to garner further comment and input from the broader community, knowing that there is the potential that these plan approaches could change based on broader community input. So really wanted to stress that point, that these are a work in progress. So let's begin by taking a very high-level overview of need analysis. This is a very critical component of the long-range facility plan, because at its root, what it really involves is taking a look at the condition of your existing facilities within the context of the goals and objectives that your community has established, and determining whether or not they are adequately supporting learning and the success of your students. And to do that, generally, we look at them in three large areas. The first of those is physical condition, what needs to be repaired, if anything, or replaced. We also look at program configuration. How well are they supporting your educational programs, and could they be doing better in some way? And also look at the capacity of your existing schools, compare that against enrollment projections, and determine if they're going to be supporting your needs from a capacity standpoint. We actually like to start these discussions and presentations really with the educational component, because that's why your facilities exist in the school district. And one of the metrics we use to sort of look at educational adequacy involves the square footage per student that is available at a given facility. And this is just one of several metrics, but it's useful because it allows you to make a comparison between your facilities and national benchmarks and other benchmarks closer to home. And it's useful because it begins to indicate whether or not your facilities provide certain space to support education. And what we do know is that very typically across the board, across all districts, is that older schools, not just elementary schools, but middle schools and high schools as well, typically have a lower area per student. And this is commonly related to things like shared cafeterias and gymnasiums. So rather than having two spaces, you may have one space that is shared by those, and that impacts usability and flexibility. But also, it is a good indicator for whether or not your facilities have other shared learning areas or not, or if they're just corridors with general classrooms off those corridors. And also other learning spaces, particularly associated with art, and in some districts, music and other functions like that. We also look at facility condition, and this is a chart showing the relative condition of the Mercer Island School District facilities. The numbers that you are seeing on the bar charts are coming from an ICOS assessment, which is a standardized facility condition assessment used by the state of Washington. The higher the number, the better the condition of the school. What this was really indicating is that the older schools in Mercer Island are in what would be considered fair condition, and that the two older buildings at the middle school, as you can see by this bar chart, would be in the worst condition of all your facilities, followed relatively closely by the older elementary schools that you have in the district. And then the third area of need that we looked at involves capacity and its relationship to projected enrollment over time. The school district actually engaged two different demographers to do a comparative analysis of projected enrollment. And that enrollment is a 10-year enrollment. And the bottom line of this analysis suggests that over the next 10 years, there'll be a significant number of seats empty at all levels in the district. This is taking enrollment out through the year 2032. At the elementary level, this would be equivalent to roughly an entire elementary of available seats across the district. And so specifically, when we dive into this enrollment and capacity topic, some of the takeaways based on the 10-year enrollment projection report are that at the elementary level, there's a projected 2% decline over the next 10 years. At the middle school level, a projected 3% decline. And at the high school level, a projected 16% decline. And as I mentioned before, that really results in approximately 454 seats available at the elementary level, 392 seats at the middle school level, and 340 at the high school level being available. We also asked the 2023 Facility Planning Committee to take a look at the good work that had been done by the 2020 committee, with the purpose of determining whether or not that work that had been done was still applicable and valid as we moved forward with the 2023 update. That included looking at the planning goals that had been established by the 2020 Facility Planning Committee to see if they are still relevant and applicable to the plan update. And I'm happy to say that the 2023 committee confirmed that the goals that had been established are in fact still relevant and should be used as a basis for assessment of facilities, the assessment of your existing facilities relative to these goals. I would also point out that a couple of other goals were added at the bottom of this. Those were including facility improvements to support fine and performing arts at the high school, and a second goal, which is include facility improvements to support college and career readiness at the high school. We also asked the committee to review and validate whether or not the 2020 Facility Planning Committee's assessment of your existing facilities against those goals was still valid and could be used as a basis for the 2023 update. And what this exercise really involved is from the perspective of the 2020 Facility Planning Committee's personal knowledge of the facilities, did they feel like each one of your sites was adequate from the standpoint of capacity and enrollment, its physical condition, and also its educational adequacy. And so here you can see there were a number of schools, primarily the elementary schools and the middle school, the older middle school buildings, which were determined as not being in alignment with those objectives. And the 2023 committee did in fact agree that this assessment was still valid and could be used as a basis for the update. And we asked the 2023 Facility Planning Committee to take a look at the committee recommendations coming out of the 2020 committee meetings, specifically with regard to the approach to each level of facilities. And these approaches were at the elementary level to replace rather than modernize the 3 older elementary schools over time. At the middle school level, to replace rather than modernize the older middle school buildings at some point in the future. And at the high school level, to modernize that facility on an as-needed basis with an emphasis on educational adequacy and supporting your educational programs. And the 2023 Facility Planning Committee looked at these approaches and determined that they were also applicable and could be used as a basis for moving forward with the 2023 Long-Range Facility Plan update. Now, a number of things have changed since 2020, and so we wanted to bring these considerations to the current Facility Planning Committee. And I'm going to provide a very high-level overview of what has changed since the original long-range plan. These considerations include, at the high school level, due to the current enrollment projections coming from the demographer, that no additions adding capacity will be needed at the high school. And in fact, based on these projections, there may be an opportunity to look at repurposing some of the existing space, the available existing space, for other programmatic needs. And so that's one opportunity and one difference that has changed. At the middle school level, the reduction in enrollment suggests that if there was any work specifically regarding replacement of the older schools, that the size of the middle school could be based on the projected enrollment rather than the current size of the middle school, replacing it in its current size. At the elementary school, there are actually 2 capacity options that could be considered by the Facility Planning Committee for an elementary school. These options are looking at a 450 student capacity. And the second option is looking at a 600 student capacity. And the reason behind considering these two options is primarily associated with the current 10-year enrollment projections, and whether or not it makes sense to look at creating a larger elementary school and reducing the number of schools versus creating similar size or actually slightly smaller replacement schools and maintaining the number of elementary schools across the district. Again, this is only being put forth as a consideration. It's not any sort of recommendation in any way. At the Mary Waite pool, some of the considerations are due to work being done associated with CAP Tech dollars and matching grant funding, that there's likely no bond work anticipated for that. So there have been improvements to the Mary Waite pool in the interim since 2020 that suggests that it's perhaps a little bit lower in priority and less work would need to be done. For Crest Learning Center, a replacement or expansion of that facility is probably not needed. This is really, again, due to declining high school enrollment and also the fact that additional space has been made available since 2020 in that existing facility. So the need there is somewhat less. And then finally, at the administration building, recognition that there are both accessibility considerations that may be included in the management of facilities over time, and also life safety improvements that should be considered for that particular facility. Included in these considerations and kind of diving into a little bit higher level of detail, both at the middle and the elementary schools, we wanted to create a diagram that put forth a couple of different approaches that the facility plan could consider. On the left hand of this diagram, you see basically the existing square footage of your middle school, both the new building and the older buildings. And really the consideration is whether or not, if any modifications or replacements of the middle school are recommended by the facility committee at some point, whether or not those replacements involve maintaining the existing capacity or in alignment with the reduced enrollment projections, replacing the middle school buildings to really mirror the appropriate size of the facility based on those projections. And so you're essentially reducing the capacity to align better with the 10-year projections. At the elementary school, a couple of different considerations. As you know, there are currently 4 existing elementary schools, and you see the capacities listed on those 4 on the left-hand side of this diagram. One option is to go ahead and as you start to replace your older elementaries over time, to replace those at a slightly smaller size than they currently are, and you would maintain the number of elementaries across the district as you do that. And then a second option is to look at replacing the elementary facilities at a slightly larger size than the schools currently are, with the potential of taking offline one of the existing schools. And then finally, in preparation for the development of plan approaches, it's very important for those discussions, particularly with regard to developing plan approaches that are really supported by the community, to understand what the costs of each of those plan approaches are and really what projects realistically might be contained in each of those plan approaches. And to do that, we need to understand what the basis of costs are for any proposed project that might be put forth. And this is really at its root about understanding the foundation of costs associated with that development of plan approaches. So we shared with the 2023 Facility Planning Committee the inflationary factors that really influence construction costs. And what you're looking at is a chart that is the Mortenson Cost Index, and it really tracks over time the increasing cost of construction. So here you see from 2009 up through 2023. We brought it a little bit closer to home for Mercer Island School District and took a very specific look at Northwood, which, as you know, is your most recent new elementary project constructed in 2015, and really tried to put this within the context of what a building similar to that would cost today. Northwood in 2015 cost approximately $43 million. If we apply the Mortenson Index to that, and also add some additional costs associated with increased code requirements since that period of construction in 2015, that building would be projected to cost somewhere in the order of $76 million or so, based on a 450 student size. So it would be a little bit smaller elementary if you were to use that as the approach rather than constructing a larger elementary. That would equate to roughly $74 million in today's dollars. But we also want to understand, because you're not constructing a new elementary today and you're not spending today's dollars, what the cost might look like when you could potentially be constructing an elementary. And we're not saying that in this diagram that the school district and the community will be constructing a replacement elementary in 2028. This is, again, really just as a basis of understanding and really giving an order of magnitude of what might be involved relative to the cost of a given replacement project, and using that to inform any discussions associated with plan development. So what you see here is the Northwood cost of approximately $43 million in 2015. The current cost escalated to today's dollars at $74 million. And then if we project forward to a point in the future where the district might actually be constructing an elementary school, and we just used the year 2028 in this example case, the projected cost would be closer to $95 million. We wanted to cross-check those Mortenson Cost Index numbers with actual costs coming out of projects being completed now. And so Malem, the Mercer Island School District, and RNC Cost Estimating, a third-party cost estimator, collaborated together to take a look at actual costs being incurred today on projects and really escalating those out in a similar fashion to try and cross-reference against the Mortenson Index. And what you see is the projected cost per square foot in today's dollars for different projects at different grade levels. And ultimately, what this very quick sort of analysis did, this cross-check analysis, it validated that the Mortenson Cost Index study and the projected cost of an elementary school in this instance, the previous example, is about right. They do align up. And so those numbers, using those numbers as the basis for plan development is appropriate and correct. And we also shared with the facility planning committee what some of the components of these costs are. So in addition to just the construction costs, there are a number of project costs which add up to the total square foot cost of any given project. These include demolition costs, site improvement costs, and a number of soft cost multipliers, sales tax, construction contingencies, fees, and so forth. So that really concludes at a very high level an overview of the background information that was used by the facility planning committee to begin to develop a number of different plan approaches for the long-range facility plan update. And again, I did want to stress that these plan approaches have been developed through a series of meetings with the facility planning committee. They broke up into separate work sessions and came up with the approaches which are not seen as a complete product yet. They're really, the intention is to use these as a basis for further commentary and input by the broader community, knowing that these long-range approaches could very well be adjusted in response to that input. And our next meeting, which will be the second portion of this two-part presentation, will be on August 24th, live with the Mercer Island School Board in a work session. Thank you very much.